Have you opened yourself up to a spiritual journey and found yourself wishing to have meaningful spiritual experiences? Maybe you've heard others having life-altering spiritual experiences and are wondering why you may not be having them yourself. I myself have had a wide variety of spiritual experiences and have identified how to reliably open yourself up to them. In this video, we will explore what is blocking people from having meaningful spiritual experiences, a simple framework for what is necessary for anyone to have a spiritual experience, and how to continue deepening into the spiritual realms. Before we dive into that, I want to share what I even mean by a spiritual experience. From my perspective, everything is spiritual. So what am I really referring to when I allude to the phrase spiritual experience? Generally, what I'm referring to is something that stands out beyond the normal waking consciousness that we experience on a day-to-day basis. The type of thing that you'll know when you experience it. But some extreme examples that I can offer are things like near-death experiences. Those are oftentimes associated or correlated with very profound spiritual experiences, and also very commonly associated with spiritual experiences are psychedelic experiences from psychoactive substances, plant medicines, and the sort. But it can be anything that involves experiences beyond the primary five senses, things that may include sensing or directly connecting with the presence of a non-physical entity or non-physical entities. This could involve seeing energy or seeing spirits. It also doesn't even need to be during your waking consciousness. It could be happening while you're sleeping or dreaming. One can have an experience in another realm while they are sleeping that feels very different, that can definitely feel like a spiritual experience. Could be something that could be classified as receiving a download or some type of energy or thought infusion that just seems to kind of come out of nowhere. Can be simply experiencing heightened perceptions and tapping into higher states of consciousness, temporarily or for prolonged periods of time. They can range from being extremely profound and life-altering to routine and unremarkable. As people begin opening up to these experiences or a spiritual path, some begin actively seeking the more profound and potent experiences. So I will be sharing how you can position yourself to where these can find you more readily, and a simple protocol to induce one on your own if you so choose. But first, I will share a simple framework that will highlight the mechanism that allows for spiritual experiences to occur and why many people are unable to access them. This is a framework that I have coined called the 5 layers of consciousness. Did you know that there are 5 layers of consciousness? Just a quick overview of what these 5 layers are. There is the physical layer, the mental layer, the emotional layer, the energetic layer, and the spiritual layer. Essentially what everyone is perhaps seeking in terms of a spiritual path is housed in the spiritual layer. And all of these layers go from the physical layer at the bottom to the spiritual layer at the top, with the higher layers being the primary drivers of the lower layers. Essentially, the spiritual experiences are in this highest layer, and one cannot have a spiritual experience. Basically, one cannot enter the spiritual layer routinely if they have not addressed and opened up enough in the prior 4 layers. There's essentially a ceiling that someone is running into. There needs to be an open pathway up to the spiritual layer, which I will share how we can make that happen later. We will explore each layer more deeply now, what they entail, and the pitfalls of trying to have a spiritual experience from just that single layer, and the blocks that are common with each layer. So now, starting with the physical layer. The physical layer includes things like your behaviors, actions, habits, your body, and your state of well-being, your physical environment, the things going on around you, and the people you spend time with, so on and so forth. This is where the majority of humanity focuses its attention on, and generally no further. They are generally consumed with the physical happenings of their lives and the world around them, things like their job, their relationships, their finances, their physical possessions, entertainment, so on and so forth. Someone is not going to have a spiritual experience if these are one's only area of focus. You essentially have to make space for a spiritual experience if one is ever to find you. And generally speaking, many religions generally operate solely from the physical layer. They're focused generally on simple behaviors. You take your body, go to a certain place like a church, a mosque, or a synagogue, then engage in a specific ritual or some kind of prayer. You perhaps read a specific sacred text, and from there expect some kind of spiritual experience, whatever that means according to that tradition. Generally speaking, these specific behaviors themselves are all one is offered to experience as a form of spiritual connection. Your prayer is the spiritual experience. You going to church is the spiritual experience, basically moving from your bedroom or your house or your living room into another room that is called a church. That is your spiritual experience, generally speaking, in those traditions. It's generally just going through motions in hopes that something profound happens. Or even worse, some may believe that only a select few in these religious traditions are capable of having more robust spiritual connections, like priests, rabbis, and prophets. Essentially, the message is, don't even try to connect spiritually on your own, because you're not worthy. Of course, that is not true. This is why some have alluded to the fact that they have never found God in church, or why vast hordes of humanity are abandoning their religious upbringings, seeking other pathways for divine connection. And other factors that tend to block people in the physical layer are things like being stressed out or just being too busy. Essentially, as I was alluding to earlier, they've not made any time or space in their lives to have a spiritual experience. They're too engrossed in their day-to-day happenings. Other blocks could be just simply being physically unwell, tired, severely stressed, or their body may be full of toxicity and just too busy processing a lot of toxic chaos in their life, or they might be just in a very chaotic environment. There could be a lot of disturbance, distortion, chaos, noise that is preventing someone from opening up and having space for a spiritual experience. Now, moving on to the mental layer. The mental layer includes things like your thoughts and your beliefs, mental patterns, and perhaps most importantly are your psychological parts. This is something that is very often unacknowledged, or perhaps many people are simply unaware of, but we all have multiple aspects of self in our psyche that have their own wants, needs, desires, almost like their own personality that come online through various mechanisms and happenings in our lives. And other spiritual traditions and religions do oftentimes take things a step further into this mental layer and acknowledge the power of things like meditation or contemplation or simply focusing your mind. The philosophy being partly that quieting the mind can allow space for the divine to enter. But they essentially try to have you think or meditate your way to a spiritual experience. While deep states of trance can be experienced in meditation, and much can come through, especially after long-term work on the higher layers, it is essentially attempting to bypass the other two higher layers to go straight to having spiritual experiences through the mind. Many profound spiritual experiences bypass the mind entirely and are almost impossible to fully comprehend mentally. Essentially, you can't just meditate your way to a spiritual experience without the other layers being activated. There are some who say that that is all that's required, or they have in fact experienced that just through meditation or things of the sort. And perhaps they are not incorrect. They may in fact be having spiritual experiences, but they are in fact aligned in the emotional and energetic layers, perhaps without simply being aware of that fact, and perhaps are simply misattributing that their meditation practice alone is what is taking them to these higher states of consciousness and to these spiritual experiences. The common blocks that appear from the mental layer are some of the things that I've already alluded to: staying only in the mind, or only in one's thoughts, or the mind being too active. There's just simply too much movement for anything to enter from a higher state of consciousness. Perhaps having negative and rigid thoughts. If someone has a thought of, I can't have a spiritual experience, that is going to be proven true in their life. Essentially, having a closed mind is not going to be open to receive these higher states of consciousness and higher spiritual experiences. The mind must be open. Another one is having disintegrated parts of self. As I was alluding to, we often have parts of self that may want different things. Our parts might believe different things. One part of our psyche may want some of these spiritual experiences, but another part of us may be scared of these spiritual experiences. That part that's scared is going to dominate and prevent the other part that wants the spiritual experience from happening. You need to have some form of psychological integration for directed mental action and not being pulled in different directions. That is the mental layer. Now moving on to the emotional layer. Unsurprisingly, the emotional layer includes your emotions. Essentially, what emotional state are you in? Are you going to be aligned with the spiritual dimensions if you are severely enraged, deeply afraid or panicked, or feeling ashamed of yourself? Probably not. And another big factor here is whether one's heart is open in a meaningful manner or not. Higher states of consciousness, where spiritual experiences are common, are associated with higher emotional states, things like joy, peace, and love. Spiritual experiences, energies, beings, spiritual beings are in those states themselves. So you must be in a similar state for you to be aligned with them. If you are not in those states, that is totally okay. It is not about bypassing your emotions to force these higher emotional states. But you're going to need to be in those higher emotional states to some capacity for the spiritual experiences to reach you. Some spiritual traditions do talk a lot about being heart-centered and living from the heart, but they oftentimes pay almost no attention to literally any other emotional state or how to actually achieve a heart-centered state of being, other than making a decision to do so, again, from the mind. The blocks that often show up to the emotional layer are very ubiquitously emotional repression and emotional bypassing. This is a ginormous problem amongst humanity. We all have experienced challenging circumstances in our lives, and for whatever reason, the circumstances perhaps force us to perhaps even consciously suppress them in the moment, and then later on, after enough time goes by without processing, they become unconsciously repressed, and those emotions become repressed for long periods of time and stay within our body. Repressing emotions, which mean if someone is repressing all of their emotions, which is generally how it goes, that means also the positive emotional states are also blocked and inaccessible. And then taking it a step further is the act of emotional bypassing, which is ignoring the fact that these emotions don't need to be addressed at all. Some people have never faced their repressed emotions, ever. That the first time they meaningfully quiet their mind or try genuinely meditating for even just a few minutes, what happens is they start oftentimes being flooded with anxiety. All those repressed emotions that they've been keeping at bay for perhaps their entire lifetime start trickling to the surface, and all of a sudden they're flooded with anxiety, and oftentimes it's just too much and can oftentimes lead them to just giving up because it's too uncomfortable, or they meet that first ceiling where they are going to be called to face their emotions for a season of time before moving on. And another block at this layer is the heart not being opened enough. The heart is the gateway, which will be explored further in the energetic layer. So that completes the emotional layer. Now moving on to the energetic layer, which includes things like your entire energy field. Everything in existence is energy, including you, and you have an energy field that moves all around you. That can be measured and quantified through scientific instruments. The most perhaps prominent aspect of your energy field in the energetic layer is what could be called the chakra system, or your primary energy centers, particularly your primary 7 energy centers, your primary 7 chakras. So, as I mentioned, everything is energy, including the spiritual experiences that you may be trying to align with. They are also energy. So, your energy field must be in alignment, a match to those experiences. This is a law of the universe, the law of resonance. Essentially, like attracts like. You will only experience things that you are in direct resonance with. If you are not in resonance with something, it will not appear in your life. These spiritual experiences are usually at a higher frequency or at a higher vibration of energy than where you are currently vibrating on a regular basis. That is precisely why someone does not have a spiritual experience if they want one. They are not an energetic match for one. This is also the layer where the pathway to spiritual experiences gets revealed very clearly. As I already mentioned, the chakra system is a very important contributing factor to the energetic layer in your energy system, so I will do a quick overview here, and this will be helpful in highlighting the direct pathway to these spiritual experiences. So our primary 7 energy centers start from our root center at the base of our spine, then the sacral near the womb space if you are a woman, or just the lower belly area, then the solar plexus just above the navel area, then the heart chakra, throat chakra, third eye, and then the crown. A spiritual experience can only occur through the higher energy centers, throat, third eye, crown. Specifically the third eye and crown chakra, and in particular, the crown chakra is perhaps the energy center that directly connects you to the spiritual layer, that directly connects you to the divine, your soul, so on and so forth. Energy from higher realms primarily enters your body through your crown. If the crown chakra is completely closed off, none of these experiences can reach you. And it does not need to be fully opened. It does not need to be at the level of, say, the Buddha or something of the sort, or someone of the sort. It just needs to be at a certain threshold of openness. And this happens naturally as one clears distortions and blockages in the lower centers. And as one clears and opens up the heart, as your energy will then begin naturally rising into and activating the higher centers. As I alluded to in the emotional layer, the heart chakra is the gateway to the higher centers. If the heart chakra is completely closed, no energy essentially can begin rising up to these higher spiritual centers. And once the heart chakra is open enough, energy can then move naturally into these higher centers where these spiritual experiences will become inevitable. A spiritual experience requires a clear enough channel with an open enough crown center, which demands the heart to be open enough first. Again, enough must be addressed at the emotional layer. And this isn't about being perfect, but clear enough in each layer. There is some form of a threshold that likely needs to be achieved for most people. If you're watching this and are open to or perhaps actively seeking a spiritual experience, you're likely already at or close to that threshold. And the more that is cleared in each of the lower layers, more can be brought through into the spiritual layer. Energetically, that is matched as well. The more that's cleared below, more can rise above. More clearing the lower chakras leads to more energy rising into the higher chakras. And my guess is that there are literally no exceptions to this notion. You must have a certain energetic threshold of opening in the crown chakra. A spontaneous spiritual awakening or a spontaneous experience perhaps only appears spontaneous on the surface. It may only appear random, like it just happened to somebody. But if you look deeper, a person was likely preparing their vessel and the prior layers to be able to receive such an experience, possibly for years in advance, which was my direct personal experience. I wasn't aware of any of these concepts myself, but I was making my way through the earlier layers for many years, which eventually led to my spiritual awakening. And I only learned about these concepts after the fact. Now, the blocks to the energetic layer are blockages and distortions in one's energy field. As I alluded to in the emotional layer, it is very common for people to have repressed emotions. As I mentioned, everything is energy, including your thoughts and including your emotions. If you have repressed, stuck emotions, that means you have repressed, stuck energy. And that creates energetic blockages for that energy to be able to rise. So these energetic distortions and blockages that are preventing one from opening the heart and that energy rising to the crown are primarily existing in the lower three energy centers. Unfortunately, that is where the vast majority of humanity is operating from the root, sacral, and solar plexus chakras, which tend to keep people focused on survival and material desires. And as I mentioned, if the heart chakra is not open enough, that is another block as well. So now we have arrived at the fifth and final layer, the spiritual layer, which means these spiritual experiences now await you here. If you have done the work on the prior layers, it is time to receive. And this layer is essentially infinite, so I will not be diving deep in terms of all of the things that could be potentially experienced once you enter the spiritual layer meaningfully, but this is what people are likely looking for as they embark on a spiritual path, to enter into the spiritual layer of their consciousness. If someone has cleared and opened up enough from the earlier layers, your energy will have risen enough to the crown, and you are essentially guaranteed to expand spiritually and have meaningful experiences. So now, putting all of this together, let's say now you would like to induce a spiritual experience for yourself, or perhaps you may be on the lookout for a way you may be able to go find. Maybe you're thinking about taking a spiritual pilgrimage or going to an event or a retreat that may be advertising that spiritual experiences may await you if you attend this event. I'm going to highlight a protocol that can allow you to initiate a spiritual experience on your own, or perhaps be able to assess if an experience you're perhaps considering could actually bring you there. They may be advertising that they can create one, but if they're not going through each of the layers in the process, in this protocol that I'm laying out here, even if it's indirectly, even if they're not using the exact language I'm telling you, chances are you may not be experiencing a spiritual experience like they're advertising. So I'm going to highlight a protocol that you can do on your own. You can do this on your own, in your home, in your bedroom, just by yourself. So starting with the physical layer, you can do what I'm about to lay out here on your own, in your bedroom, and ideally you are in a well-nourished and well-rested state, and you are in as quiet an environment as possible. And some common guidance here is to sit upright. That kind of creates a clear energetic channel. Again, if you want the energy to enter through your crown, sometimes keeping a clear upright channel can aid that, but it's not required. I've had many spiritual experiences lying down. Essentially, you don't want to fall asleep, but the key point on the physical layer is you want to have your nervous system in a calm state. If you're too agitated, if you're in a state of fear and panic, your body is thinking that you're being chased by a tiger, there's no energy available for a spiritual experience. So simply put, the focus wants to be on creating a physical environment, physical state that allows your nervous system to calm down. So some things you can do are just simply to slow your breathing, slow your inhales and deep exhales. You can even touch your body in a way that feels like you're caressing or you're caring for yourself, holding yourself. You can say nice words to yourself if you feel that aids in the process. So whatever you think you need to do to feel well enough, safe enough, and relaxed enough. Again, generally, you just want to arrive at that point where your nervous system is calm. Now, moving into the mental layer, now that your nervous system and your body is calm, now you want to calm your mind, because the mind can still be going 1,000 miles an hour. So you want to calm and clear your mind, to open up your mind, open up that space. So this can be a simple meditation. It doesn't need to be anything profound. It doesn't need to take hours at a time. It can simply just be calming the mind down, focusing on something, focusing on a mantra, or even just focusing on your breath, or just consciously setting aside your busy mind. Those thoughts, consciously, you can put them aside and say, I'll revisit my priorities, the tasks, my to-do list later. But for now, I'm just going to settle my mind. Essentially, your mind just needs to be calm and open and receptive enough. It doesn't need to be perfect, but some type of calmness needs to be present in your mind. Moving into the emotional layer now, here's where typically people are not really even advancing into. So here's to add to your experience. You would have the opportunity to now drop into your heart, or drop into some type of emotional state to amplify your experience, because now you want to raise your vibration using your emotions. So you can consciously now drop into your heart, literally just, you can even focus on your heart space, that heart chakra, and begin to consciously choose to feel loving, or entering a state of peace or joy, or some type of higher state that may be accessible to you at the time. That doesn't need to be forced, but if one of these higher states is accessible for you, that would be a useful thing to try to work towards. And you can be honest with yourself. Again, it's not about emotionally bypassing the state that you're in. You may not be in a state where you have these really high states of joy accessible to you. That is totally fine. Just simply being in a state of neutrality can be good enough. Or just being in a state of gentle receptivity. You may not have it within you at that moment to be overflowing with joy, but you can be gently receptive. That can be good enough. You just need to not be in a state of like fear or worry, or one of these really harsh lower emotional states. That is what's going to really block you. Being neutral is good enough. But the higher emotional state that you can be in will enhance the effects. Now, moving on to the energetic layer of this protocol. This is something that you can also do in advance, but you can energetically cleanse your physical environment. You can do things like burning Palo Santo or sage. You can have crystals around you, high frequency objects, anything that you can do to clear perhaps dense energy in your space. Opening a window if it feels just damp and energy has been stagnant in where you are. You can clear that energy in advance. Maybe even taking a shower, washing your hands, anything that you feel might help you feel more cleansed. Water is a cleansing element. So you can do things to cleanse yourself and cleanse your environment to, again, stack the deck in your favor. But even if you don't want to do things of the sort, you can then start to consciously activate your energetic field, the energetic layer. You can do things like visualizing your own energy field. You can see it activating. There are some quick practices here that I'll offer. You can ground your energy into the earth. Sometimes when we're trying to activate spiritually, we can get a little bit too lost in the head and perhaps be ungrounded. There's a phrase that is very applicable here, that the tallest trees have the deepest roots. So helping yourself ground into the earth can also help. And this is where, going back to the physical layer, if you can do something of the sort in nature where you're actually touching the earth, that can actually help amplify things. But you can visualize your energy like with an energetic cord dropping from your root or from your feet, dropping into the earth, into the core of the earth, can help you feel grounded. And then on the flip side, you can do an energetic opening from your crown, reaching to the heavens, or consciously visualizing maybe your crown opening. And you can now perhaps call in high frequency, perhaps golden white light that you can now feel and see coming into your crown center, and see it filling up your body. This is a way to support you in essentially consciously raising your vibration, raising your frequency. This will help you to be energetically matched to the experience that you're trying to open yourself up to. Essentially, getting your crown open and clear enough in the moment. And from here, you've essentially done the first 4 layers now, and now you may simply just receive from here. If the first 4 layers are in alignment, the spiritual layer can activate on its own without any direction, and you'll get what is meant for you in that moment. And it may not be anything huge or life-altering, but something will likely transpire beyond your usual waking consciousness. You may have a profound insight drop in, what you might call a download. You may start to sense energy around you that you are not normally paying attention to, or perhaps something far greater. However, when you develop your spiritual connections and faculties, you can self-direct this process now in the spiritual layer by directly calling in who or what you are wishing to connect to. So let's say you did the first 4 layers. Now you've arrived to the spiritual layer. You know, hey, I want to connect with my own soul or higher self or my own spirit guides. You can now put that intention out there to start directly being in the driver's seat a little bit more. And the spiritual experiences that you're trying to call in will meet you probably even more robustly because you're being clear and you're being directed. You're essentially inviting. You're being very clear on what you're inviting. So you're essentially opening the door and welcoming a certain type of experience. So that is going to stack the deck in your favor again to have that specific experience. So now, this is the type of protocol that you can use for yourself, or again, you can examine whether any other types of experiences that you may be considering, whether it's a pilgrimage or a retreat or an event, if they're not doing the things that I've laid out here, it's probably going to be a bit challenging for you to have the largest spiritual experience that you may be hoping to have. And I will share a couple things now on perhaps how you can induce these types of experiences even faster or go on a more accelerated path if you wish to do so. One can go directly to or enhance this spiritual layer, enhance these spiritual connections with certain practices, such as there's one in particular, or there are various types of hypnosis practices that essentially can take you directly into a state of consciousness where it's basically shutting off all of those blocks and it's taking you directly to a connection to the spiritual domain. There's one that's very common and popular called QHHT, Quantum Healing Hypnosis Technique. It is something that I've done myself. You're essentially guaranteed to have a spiritual experience. You can also work with a skilled energy or spiritual practitioner. Someone who is adept in these realms can help guide you into a spiritual experience on their own, or sometimes even just being in the presence of a highly attuned individual, or even just going to a specific place in the world that are sometimes called sacred sites. The frequency there is quite high and is conducive for some of these spiritual experiences. These are essentially just raising your frequency to allow spiritual experiences to find you a little bit easier. But there still must be that original threshold that you have hit for any of these things to be available. And these are also the types of things that someone who has been preparing themselves in the earlier layers would be interested in. But these are the types of things that are good to be aware of. Once you've kind of already meaningfully broken into that spiritual layer, if you're hoping for an accelerated path, you can go just direct to this spiritual layer. And I'll also call out a couple other common practices or modalities and experiences that tend to directly induce very intense spiritual experiences. And those are breathwork practices. Some can be called holotropic breathwork, various forms of intense breathwork, and as well as psychedelics and plant medicines. These are very common for creating and generating what might be classified as potent spiritual experiences. And the reason these often generate those types of experiences is in the fact that they activate all 5 layers. It's very common that they activate intense emotional release or emotional engagement. There are certain psychedelics, plant medicines, certain substances that directly operate from your emotional layer and are called empathogens, meaning that they directly activate one's emotions. They oftentimes also activate and contribute to the raising of your energy and raising of your own frequency. Some substances in particular, and this can happen through breathwork on its own, directly cause the release of what is called DMT in the brain. DMT is a molecule that is released from your pineal gland and is associated with directly experiencing and interfacing with what we might call other dimensions, where a lot of spiritual experiences are known to happen. But again, the people who are typically drawn to these types of things are often those who have already done work on the earlier layers already. So someone who hasn't done the work on the earlier layers and attempts to engage in perhaps holotropic breathwork or some type of psychoactive experience, they likely will not get much out of it because they're probably still blocked in those earlier layers. They may be holding back out of fear, so they may not be very receptive to some of those experiences. They just may not be ready for them just yet. But for someone who is on that path, has been working on those earlier layers, These practices, breath work and psychedelic plant medicine substances, can be an accelerated path, but of course they are not for the faint of heart and would be prudent to have some preparation. It would be wise to know what you're getting into before just jumping into those experiences. So now, if you want to have even more robust spiritual experiences or expand further into the spiritual domain, perhaps you've already had some small flickers of spiritual experiences and you're just ready for the next robust experience, or you're hoping, or typically what tends to happen, once someone gets that first major taste, there tends to be a seeking mechanism, or they want more of that because they realize what's generally happening is those experiences are at a higher frequency and their day-to-day waking consciousness is at a lower frequency. So there is a bit of a seeking of that higher frequency, which is totally okay. So if you wish to embark or expand further into the spiritual domain, it simply involves continual long-term work on addressing all 5 layers of consciousness mentioned here, continuing to clear, release, heal, expand, integrate in the physical layer, mental, emotional, energetic, and spiritual layers. The more you open up in the higher layers, the more you uncover how to improve the lower layers. Clearing blockages in each layer creates a self-perpetuating expansion process and will allow anyone to increase the frequency and potency of spiritual experiences. Again, one must be a vibrational match to the spiritual realms in order to engage with them. So the more you raise your baseline vibration, the more these experiences will open up to you. I mentioned how to do this systematically in another video, how to systematically raise your baseline level of vibration, not just momentarily experiencing an increase in vibration, but have your baseline, your day-to-day average of frequency be to improve that and increase it. I did make a video on how to systematically do that. So I will link that here and in the description if you are curious to learn more. So in closing, I hope this helped clarify the process of arriving at meaningful spiritual experiences and expansion. If you find yourself feeling stuck in one of the earlier layers that I mentioned here, feeling trepidation as you expand spiritually, or simply wish to have guidance as you move through a healing and spiritual journey, I do offer one-on-one support in these exact areas with one-on-one session journeys and long-term coaching. I have navigated all 5 of these layers to major depths and had a very potent and profound spiritual expansion process with a large number of spiritual experiences, big and small. So I'd be happy to meet you in whatever you're navigating. You are welcome to reach out through my website link in the description. That wraps up this video. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.